Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Stakeholder Whispering Live, where we're here to talk about stakeholder whispering. That's the name of the book that I wrote, which is about how our stakeholders often don't know what they need. Hey, look at that beautiful thing. Uh, and our job is to help them figure it out. And we should probably work on that, maybe instead of what they asked us to do in the first place. Sometimes they're the same thing, but sometimes they're not. But we're not here to talk about the book per se. Here to talk about the ideas. And I always bring on a guest. And today I have the amazing Jason Forrest with us. And Jason, as you all know at this point, if you've been watching, I usually do a very short introduction and then I let people introduce themselves. And normally I'll say, well, Jason is from XYZ, but Jason has like 47 titles and 800 things going on right now. So, Jason, I'm not even going to bother trying. All I will say is that Jason and I know each other. We've known each other for a while from the world of data visualization. But man, I think you need to tell us more about who you are and what you're doing right now.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking to have me join you. Yeah, so I basically have a few different roles. I was an associate partner at McKinsey and Company, where I was the director of their data visualization lab. I helped to lead a lot of their more public projects over the last 9 years. About a year and a half ago, I left McKinsey to start my own agency called the Jason Forrest Agency, very creative title. And then I'm one half of a data art team called Data Vandals, which is actually gaining a tremendous amount of momentum with kind of exhibitions and workshops globally, which is very exciting. And then on top of all of that, this is where the real kind of record scratch, like, how do you have time? Like, do you sleep? Questions come, is that I'm also the founder and chair of a new graduate program for the School of Visual Arts called Data Visualization and Communication. It's an MPS program. Will be 10 months, beginning to end, with equal focus on design and data, which I think should be quite unique in education.
So 10 months. Wow, that's great. That's a really tight program. And you said design and data. So meaning like data analytics, or is it data communications, or well, obviously
So
both, but like
yeah, so it's interesting because when you look at the term data communications today, it doesn't really have like a good definition. It can even mean in some cases like data engineering, which is just kind of like, well, what?
yeah.
Huh? Like, how does that work? When Yeah, how I kind of usually give the pitch is about, I'd say about 60 to 70% of all people in data visualization come from a data science background. And almost all of the ones that I've talked to, which would be about at this point 60, 70 people, have almost always just been given a single class and like how to make a chart at the end.
Yeah.
Um, at
If
the
they're
same
if.
if exactly. And so at the same time, there's a lot of brilliant designers out there who work with data. They almost always collaborate with someone who's a data scientist or an engineer. And so you always kind of need these two sides, right? The data and the design. And so the goal is to kind of teach them together, but in service of communication. Because
Yeah.
I think that we often get lost in like how to make the chart or how to code the thing, or what's the colors. But the answer is, the whole goal is really on shifting it to the audience and the messages that you're giving them, how you're giving them the tools to hopefully make the decisions, change opinions, etc.
Yeah. In other words, we're caring about our stakeholders when we create these things. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Imagine that. Imagine that.
So I'm going to start us off today a little bit differently from how I usually do it. Usually I say, hey, I know you came with some stories from your experiences, successes, failures of stakeholder whispering. Tell us one of those. But we're not going to do that today. We're going to do that later. But we're going to start off with a question that I get asked all the time. Every time I present the book or do a workshop on it, whatever the case is, one of the first questions people always, always, always ask is, yeah, but Bill, my stakeholders are busy. They don't have time for me. What do I do in that case? And I want to ask you that, Jason, because we chatted before we got on here, and you worked at McKinsey, and the senior partners at McKinsey have about 4.5 seconds, if you're lucky, to actually engage with them. So you've lived that experience over and over and over again. How do you approach it when you know you're going to get 3 minutes with the guy or the woman? How do you prepare for it? How do you make sure that you maximize those 3 minutes? What's the secret?
It's fascinating. Thanks for asking the question. I think it's great to start there. Um, in many ways, I would say that when you only have that 3-minute window from someone, and it's oftentimes I'm getting out of an Uber and I'm walking into a building, or I have to walk between two buildings downtown. You can come with me on the walk. Uh, you have to do a few things. I think the first thing is you have to, be very brief with giving a context. You'll recall we're from this project where we talked like last week, and you asked us to do 2 or 3 things. Here's the results of, or we did those things, and we have another follow-up question for you. I think what's also very interesting, once you contextualize it for them, because they're jumping between all different types of projects and clients and scenarios, and then just like their reality of like walking down the street, right? Like you've got to basically help them get into your problem space, first of all, really quickly. Second of
In
all,
context.
in context. And the second of all is you need to rehearse and know exactly what you're trying to ask them. If you're saying to them, can you give us, more guidance on a thing? They'll just say, do this and this, right? And it can be very tactical. If you're
Yeah.
trying to say, can we get your impression of, these 4 things? That might be better, because then they can say, I like the second option, right?
Yeah.
The thing that I did, and which actually built a lot of trust between lots of different types of senior leadership, was I'd then press them for details. And I'd oftentimes just, not in a jerky way, but I would offer, you know, criticism or feedback or an honest opinion about why they asked me to do a thing. And the goal is not just to be, you know, subservient. The goal is to be a collaborator and a thought partner with these leaders. And the moment you engage them on that level, even though that you're highly cognizant and respectful of their time, they will absolutely respond.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember having a call with a very important senior leader at McKinsey who was doing exactly that, was walking between 2 buildings. And I remember that he had come in with some real hot takes. He'd come with some real hot takes while we were on the call. And finally I was like, well, if you do that, you're going to do blah, blah, blah. Like there are consequences to making some of these decisions. And he stopped walking, because I could see his camera, and you could see the sky behind him, like the trees. Right. I remember he stopped walking and he was like, huh, yeah, that's interesting. And you could literally see like the gears moving.
Yeah.
And then the nature of the conversation, and to a degree, even the nature of our collaboration changed, because I think initially it was like, who's the guy on the team that's like advancing the project? And then it was like, oh, here's a person that I can think through some of the consequences with.
Yeah. That's great. That's actually, it sounds like you got him to a state of aporia, right? That the Socratic method, the idea is to get them to that moment where they're, slightly puzzled, they're confused, they're in a moment of, wait a second, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way before, which is a hard thing to do. But here's the thing, Jason, you're an experienced professional. You're of a certain age. You were, a board member of the Data Visualization Society. You have expertise and, the gray hairs and the experience where you've earned the confidence to do that. You feel confident like pushing back against that senior leader. Can you try to remember 25-year-old you or even 36-year-old you and with less experience, how can that person do what you just described when it's not like in your bones that you can't do that? Any advice?
Sure. So I think the first thing is that, I arrived at the position where I could make those kind of comments. On the flip side, I have a version of how that turned out to be very funny with a very senior leader of a very major telecommunications company. But I'll put a pause in that. We'll come back to that one. The point is that I think when you start off younger in your career, maybe you don't feel so secure in your opinions. I think you feel like you work for this person, and you're there to kind of give that person what they asked for, because it would be bad for you. Over time, and there's this whole concept of like servant leadership, where you're really trying to support people and you're trying to be a leader and you're trying to give them the leadership that they need. And sometimes that's, and very oftentimes I would say that's actually upward, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of these senior leaders, they're tasked to do amazing things, and many of the things you don't know and are not capable of doing, but there's a lot of things that you bring that they could never do. And so part of that leadership, whether it be upward or downward, is to live your expertise, right? And that could be standing your ground. For a lot of people in data analysis, analytics, they know the data far better than their leaders do, right?
Yeah.
Just giving that expertise a voice and saying, well, that's actually not what the data is collecting, right? The moment you can help that person to see the bigger picture better, that's the moment you start to collaborate with them. And
Yeah.
whether that means, giving them a funny comment that kind of grabs their attention, or making a deck that's a little bit more pretty than you did before, right? Or even suggesting as a whiteboarding session where you can just quickly say, this is what you told us to do, but this is what we do instead. And you diagram it out for them in real time. Any
Yeah.
of those are ways to start that collaboration with leadership.
Yeah. And that's the key thing. You said it. You're a thought partner. It's collaboration. Yeah, you're not just supposed to jump to it when your boss tells you to do stuff. That's literally your job, is to actually contribute to the success of whatever it is you're working on, not just be fingers on a keyboard. Um,
And defining that success should not only be something for them to do,
yeah,
right? They may have a lot more context of the nature of what needs to be solved, the goal. But that's how you collaborate with them, is to bring your expertise to the table. That's why they hired you in the first place.
exactly. You're there for a reason.
Yeah.
All right, so you hinted at maybe a failure story. Is that what you were hinting at before about a telecommunications client?
Okay, no, this is, but we'll go on the failure story next. So,
Okay.
so I was on a call. It was a very big call with a number of very senior leaders at McKinsey, and a highly influential member of the C-suite of a major telco. And I had been given I had a certain role in these calls to kind of come on and be the person that kind of gets people excited, because that's kind of what I do. And oftentimes there are different roles in leadership in very big clients where, you're supposed to kind of fulfill a certain function in the call. And they'd already told me, like, kind of like, you be the exciter and you do this bit, and then you stop. And when I got on the call, this senior leader was there and we were waiting for somebody else. And I was like, do you have any jokes? And like, it doesn't happen on a big business consultancy that someone asks if anybody has jokes. And everybody kind of looked at each other, and you could see the color drain out of their face. And so, yeah, of course, the C-suite guy had a joke. It was a pretty good one, right?
Yeah.
And so that was at the beginning of the call. And then I did my bit, and we had a whole demo, and it went very well. And we actually had a situation where it was going to end early. And so, again, having any amount of time scheduled, these senior leaders, you really have to take advantage of it. And the McKinsey leadership had kind of exhausted through what they needed in the call. And then there was this kind of awkward moment. And it's like, well, does anybody else have anything? And it was like, and I was like, I got a question.
Uh-oh.
And those same leaders, just you could see the color drain from their face.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you had to solve any problem and you didn't have to worry about the budget, you didn't have to worry about the data, like, what would it be? And you could see them be like, like, not the call, not the question to ask.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, well, but And so he kind of like, treaded water for a second, but then he started talking about this whole other initiative.
Mm.
And it was amazing because nobody on the call had heard about it before. The other people in that organization had kind of, heard some rumblings, and the people in my organization had never heard anything about it. And it ended up being a whole new engagement.
Ah,
So that was one of those moments when, you roll the dice at the end because you think you maybe developed a little bit of rapport and because you think you have a little bit of expertise, but just kind of asking in a very broad way for that kind of that future vision.
yeah,
Um, it made a big difference. That made a big difference.
that's great. That's actually one of the techniques I describe in the book for just general stakeholder whispering. Like when you're, even if you have a narrow focus, like we're trying to accomplish X, what if there were no constraints? What if we didn't have to worry about, yeah, the data, the technology, anything? What would we do? And then at the same time, the other question you can ask, which is the opposite, is what if there's nothing but constraints? What if everything was impossible? How would we do it? And when you can balance those two off of each other, yeah, people sort of can be expansive and imagine anything, but also be constrained, which makes them focused. And yeah, it's a great question. It's a great way to get people really thinking, but it is risky, especially in in more of like a sales type of situation.
It was,
That's
it
great
was,
though. Yeah.
and afterwards, I remember one of the partners called me and were like, they basically were like, why did you do that? And I was like, because that's my job. Like, my job is to ask questions of people and learn more.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it was I didn't think it was risky at all. I thought it was just like the fun part of the call,
Yeah.
frankly. And I have a mandate to have fun, you
Yeah.
know. Uh, and I think the catch was is going back to my previous comment is like that was just me bringing my expertise.
Yeah. And by the way, you just said one of the most important things I've heard anybody say.
Uh-oh.
My job is to ask questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that's literally 90% of our job.
Mhm.
Whether any designer, any creator of anything, really just about any knowledge worker, that's one of the most important things you can do. It's like a core function. It's not secondary. It's not like a maybe I should ask some questions. I mean, it's literally the core of what we do.
I mean, that
Um,
is the nature of the research element to what our jobs are.
yeah,
And I think in data, the whole field of data and analytics specifically, somehow that's not really trained that much.
no,
Right?
no.
Because they give all the
People think they're
training
supposed to have
on,
the answers. They're not supposed to be asking questions. Yeah,
yeah, but like without asking the questions, how do you know what the answers could be or should be?
uh, totally. And
Right?
like no initial request from a stakeholder or no initial thought is ever fully formed. It requires long conversations and nuance to get to what really needs to be done. I mean, that's the nature of all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I do see a comment here, which is worth sharing. It's important that
Ooh.
leaders share failure stories, not just the carefully curated success stories, which is like the perfect segue. I know you have a failure story that you wanted to share. So I gotta, let everybody in the audience know. The first thing I said, hey, be a good failures. And Jason said, I don't think I have that many failures of stakeholder whispering. And I believe him because again, he's really good at this. He's good at asking questions. He's good at, really understanding deep needs of stakeholders, et cetera. But then I said, well, can you share an example of a failure, or can you think of one where you didn't think it was stakeholder failure, but maybe it was? And he said, oh, wait, I got one. So I don't know if this is the thing you're going to share, but yeah, let's hear it.
All right. I need to conceal the names so nobody's hurt. Mostly me. So it was a number of years ago. I had not really started to kind of fulfill a lot of my mission. I had not really started to engage my kind of full personality, which when I said at the beginning that like you need to start bringing more of your skills, more of your expertise to the problem space and find out you can support people. I hadn't learned that yet,
Mm,
right? So hopefully this is a good example of failure, but also a good example of how to learn from that. I in software development teams, the UX designer occasionally will start to impede or kind of take over the role of the project manager because
mm,
as the user advocate, they have so many ideas that they then start to kind of have ideas about how things should be developed. And that is absolutely me. And I actually ended up playing a dual role on this team as the project manager and lead designer, which is, I now see in retrospect, a little tricky.
mm,
But we had this team. It was pretty big. It was about 10 people, developers and designers, and it was working on a fairly expensive internal system. And our group, for a lot of different reasons, was just not connected to kind of like the main leadership of, let's just say, IT technology.
Yep.
And I think we also thought that we knew better. I think we thought that we were a faster, better team, which may or may not have been true. Um, but I think the problem was I didn't take the time to really get to know the problems that our leadership was trying to solve.
Yeah.
And they had a series of OKRs and of KPIs that were not attuned with what I thought was the definition of success. And as I
Mm.
tried to play ball and get what I thought was the goals to align with their goals, it just didn't work. And they ended up pulling the plug on the whole project. And that was, it killed me because I had really over invested myself in the nature of this project. And I felt like I had been betrayed by leadership, although I probably was. Um, and so it really started to this point of like, what went wrong? Right? What went wrong? Like we had so
Yeah.
much right. We had it all, but yet it wasn't enough. And that's
Yeah.
really where some of my journey kind of began, because it was like, okay, how do we learn more about our leadership? How can we figure out how we can get in the kind of fast streams of value? Right? How can we align ourselves with things that are happening, initiatives that are interesting? And then from there, how can you really support these people to do something fundamentally different?
Yeah.
And all of those come down to strategy, some degree of contextualization within larger organizational needs, and then empathy, right?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to help those people to do the thing.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I mean, definitely sounds like a stakeholder understanding issue. And so, do you think that your dual role did play a factor in that also? You were both the designer, UX person, and the project manager. Tell us more about that. Like, how did that make it more difficult or less likely to succeed?
So I don't want to give too many trigger warnings here, but like we had a whole OKR thing that was very much connected to the rise of DevOps, right? So there was lots of focus on documenting and unit code and unit testing, maintainability of large software systems. Um, and we considered ourselves to be innovators that was pushing for something new. And that was fundamentally out of line with the leadership at the time, who had different goals.
Mm.
Uh, and it's funny because at the time, I wasn't empathetic. I thought I knew better. I,
Yeah.
I, I thought that what we were making was more valuable because it largely had bigger fish connected to it. But I didn't understand the type of problem that was actually trying to be solved.
And so,
Right.
was that the designer part of you that had the ego and the lack of empathy? And if you had had an independent project manager, they might have helped manage that. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I think the problem with a dual UX designer and PM is that they have two different focuses. The PM is to move things along and kind of, make sure that the boxes that have been defined are being ticked. The UX
Yeah.
designer is trying to really advocate and fight for something. And I think to use your question, I think the UX designer was being allowed to win, that
Right.
we were pushing for something for our users, but that wasn't really, you have to weigh those concerns between the organization and the users, right?
Yeah.
Prioritization.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing that
Yeah.
well.
Well, it's a great lesson to learn. I know I've learned most of what I learned from my biggest failures, and I have a not dissimilar story in the book from my own experience, where yeah, a project that got blown up because I thought I knew better, and I never really, and partially there were various factors involved, but didn't really understand what the client needed in the end, and but then, yeah, that was also a huge turning point in my career. And it sounds like this was for you too. And that's so you can sort of have that stepwise, that sort of leap in your career and how you approach things from those lessons you learned. So I guess one question, maybe last question, because I know we're running a little bit long, is Um, can you arm someone who is maybe again younger, earlier in their career? They are in that role, a similar situation to you. They have that ego. They know they're advocating for the user. They want to solve problems for their user. They're probably ignoring some other things that should not be ignored.
Mhm.
How can they learn this without having to live through the failure part? Is there such a thing?
So what changed for me was I stopped focusing. I'll tell you what happened is I had this friend. I adore him. Gunvanch Khanna is his name. And he was on the same team with me. And he came to me and he's like, "You've overinvested yourself in this project." And I was like, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
A. And B, he was like, "You've assigned your value to the project." And he was like, "Your value is what you know. And you should make sure that they can never." He was like, "If you invest time in your own skills, they can never take it away from you."
Mm,
And it sounds kind of, egocentric, but it's really not, because that was what really shifted me into more of a learning and mentee mindset, right?
mm,
How might I create the skills where I can support people better?
yeah.
How can I, find a way to, accentuate what's unique about what I bring to the table, and which is automatically going to give me more opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And when I learned, like, a year or two later, the whole thing about servant leadership, I realized that, to lead is to serve, right? You're helping your people, you're helping your leaders, get to the goals. And the goal is not to be the one that does it all yourself. The goal is not to be the person that's like defining the meeting minutes. The goal is to figure out the best answer and to get there
Yeah.
collaboratively. And a lot changed then. A lot changed, and it took me years. So it's not just like it happens overnight. But I think it really
Yeah.
starts with, how do you bring your expertise to the table in a way that complements the skills of the people around you.
I love it. And that word servant leadership came up again and again. I think it's a really important concept. So thank you for sharing that. Well,
It's
Jason,
There
oh,
was,
go
I mean,
ahead.
just as one last point here. I'm sorry, I know that we're
Yeah.
long. The one
Oh, no,
last
it's
point
fine.
is, like, what's so funny about McKinsey is that, like, they just had a big article came out, their CEO factory, and it's the same language they've had for a long time. And but the reality is that, like, that is the training you get there, is
Yeah.
to figure out how to be a leader and to how to navigate all these challenging interpersonal relationships, because that you can't really go to school for
Yeah.
that. You just got to do it.
Very, very true. By the way, I meant to ask you earlier, what was the joke?
Oh God, I'll have to. I don't remember. It was years
You,
ago.
we'll have to post it later.
I used to ask people jokes all the time, and it was
Yeah.
amazing, because I remember the first time I, like, asked, like, a member of a C-suite if they had any jokes.
Yeah.
He was at a bank, and I remember that I was, again, kind of like, and they had, like, a burner, and, like, that just became a thing. We had a whole joke channel on our Slack. Yeah, we had, like, a whole. We're going to make a joke book.
Right.
So yeah, like, that was another way of kind of. It's just a way of building bridges between people. And what we learned with data vandals. The other thing that's interesting, and maybe this is another conversation, but what we learned with data vandals is these are all just ways to build bridges,
Yeah.
right? You just want people to join you in, again, this conversation, whether that be
Yeah.
servant leadership, or whether that be finding a goal, or whether that be, collaborating and becoming a thought partner. They're just different bridges.
Yeah.
And with data vandals, it just looks different.
I like that. And by the way, I would totally read the McKinsey joke book. All right. Well,
Yeah.
Jason, I want to thank you very much for being here and sharing your experience with us today. Yeah, so where can people find you?
On LinkedIn, of course. That's my main thing. I have a website, jasonforrestftw.com. But just hit me on LinkedIn, datavandals.com for that, and jasonforrestagency.com. There's a trend there. But
Yeah,
I'm pretty easy to find.
awesome. All right, thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, and everybody else, I will see you. Actually, no, I will not see you next week because I'll be recording a new course for LinkedIn next week in Santa Barbara area. And so next week is off, but I'll be back the following week with another guest. So
Yes.
see you all soon.